Nice little voice. Here's what's going to happen today. The PowerPoint for what I'm going to talk about today is on Moodle. I think it's on the week 2 maybe section, but it's there, the childhood and parenting slides. It's basically a bunch of slides from like 4 or 5 chapters of the book, maybe 3 or 4. And so I did put those up, and I'm going to use those today to kind of guide our discussion. So I'm going to do a little bit of like lecturing type stuff. Then we're going to do a breakout room, a couple of questions. Then we're going to come back. I'll do a little bit more lecture, and then we're going to do another breakout room. So those will kind of bookend our time. And then the very, very, very end, probably the last 15 minutes, for anyone that has questions about anything going on, I'm going to reserve that whole time for that place. And so if you have questions, you can stay on at that point, or if you need to jump off, you can jump off. And I've had a couple people message me like, "Hey, I've got to be somewhere at blah 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 time." That's great. If you need to jump off, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Um, Technically, we don't even have to do these classes when they're distance learning, but I just like doing it because it's better than doing nothing. I think otherwise we never see each other, and um, usually I think people find the Zoom classes pretty helpful. So. All right. So basically, I think I said this last time. I skipped over like infancy, and you know, I kind of skipped that phase. We're going to jump into early childhood, middle childhood, late childhood. We're going to kind of jump back and forth a bit in all of those time periods. But basically, what we're looking at is this kind of pre-K, the elementary, and then just on the cusp of going into middle school. And it kind of depends. Now it depends on where you live, what middle school is. But age-wise, we're going to go from, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 all the way up until around 12 or so. And then when we meet next time, we'll pick up around 13 and run through around 19. And so I've basically divided our class times up by ages instead of just straight developmental stage. Just kind of leads our discussion a little easier. Okay. I am going to, if you're ever think I flipped the slides too quick and you don't get something, just know that they're all on Moodle. Change one thing here. There we go. Okay. So everything that I'm talking about today is on Moodle. You can always check it out there. All right. Now, still like to see everyone. Okay. And if my dog is about to bark and you're going to hear it, I apologize. Okay. So one of the great things about this book and about this class is and especially if this is one of your first classes at Amberton, this is a great one because you're going to get your first introduction to a lot of the theories, especially counseling theories, but also kind of like lifespan development types of theories. And so one of the reasons why we have theories is because we always want to know why something happens. Like, why do we walk at a certain time, talk at a certain time? Why do we, how do we start learning socially? And why is it at a certain time? And what are the factors at play? The nature nurture conversation has been around for a long time. And so the way we have kind of developed theories over time is somewhat to answer that as well. And so we're going to look at some that are, fairly old in terms of age, but then we're going to look at or talk about a couple of things that are that will complement some of the older theories as well. Because I'm going to talk a little bit about neuropsych or neurodevelopment theory too, which would be along the um, newer lines there. So Vygotsky and Piaget, I've just kind of and this is in your book. This little chart is in your book too. I think this is interesting because this is just giving like super basic comparison of a couple of different theories that are pretty popular, especially Piaget. So Erikson and Piaget are really popular, especially in the education world. They've been used in that world for a long time. I actually learned about Erikson's developmental stages. Even when I was in my undergrad, way long ago, when I was trained to be a youth and family minister, we learned about Erickson and teaching two different developmental stages and styles. And so those guys have been around for a long time, and they've kind of have worked off each other. Vygotsky's a little different because he put in a really stronger social cultural context variable, and he really kind of pushed that to say, hey, look, we don't just develop without our environment or our surroundings have anything to say about it. We have to think about not just us in our family, but what happens, like what's going on around us matters too. What's happening in our, immediate environment, or in our, somewhat medium environment, and then our larger context and the larger environment that we live in. So he would be definitely a social constructivist, which means we are socially constructed more so than we are just cognitively constructed. He wouldn't argue that we weren't cognitively constructed, but he would say that our social construction is very important to think about, which really social constructivism as a whole, like as a kind of an overall theory, is a little more, starts to become a little more postmodern. And so we have a lot of modern theories. Modernism was around for a long, long time. When when postmodern theories came into play, typically it was along the lines of social constructivism. And you guys, I'm giving you like a 10-cent version of something that's reams of research. So I'm gonna try to boil a couple of things down just for our discussion today, knowing that you'll get into a lot deeper discussion of a lot of these areas as you take other classes at Amberton. Um, there's some big differences in terms of like stages of development. Like Vygotsky was like, hey, there's no stages. Well, that Piaget and Erickson are like all about stages. If you remember, or if you've read anything about them, I mean, there's stages for everything. And not actually with Piaget, and this is where I actually agree with Piaget on this one. We have stages that we go through, but inside of those stages are different processes that we go through, where we actually assimilate to something as we kind of learn it, and then we accommodate to it, and then we have some kind of a disequilibration, like some kind of a shakeup that makes us start to assimilate to a different stage. And so I actually think that's probably right. But on the flip side of it, Vygotsky's saying, well, this proximal development is kind of like we develop within the sphere that we're in too. So we actually accommodate to what's around us as well. So we still develop. It's interesting because it's still somewhat of a stages of development. It's just a broader look at a stage, pretty much. The one thing that's interesting about Vygotsky versus Piaget is the idea of like the role of language. So Vygotsky would say, hey, language is powerful in shaping thought. And Piaget would say, well, it's important, but it's minimal. But your cognition is what actually directs language. You know what I'm saying? Like they see them very differently. And so that's why I like to compare, like we can compare theories, keeping in mind these are all theories of development, but there's a lot of research behind a lot of these theories. And so one of the things um, that I have found that was helpful for me when I first started out learning in this field was to just read as much as I could and 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 go over as many of these theories as I could and see where I kind of like what resonated with me, which is really important because as you lead from, okay, these are theories of development. How does our cognitions develop? What role does language play? What about our social emotional development? Are our cognitions really the sole focus we should have? I mean, as we read through these theories, they've been around, like I said, for a long time. When we transition from that to reading about theories of like counseling and therapy, we're going to do the same thing because we're going to start thinking, hey, I like this theory that talks about like how humans react and interact and how they change or don't change. And this kind of explains those things to me. So I would start leaning more towards, certain theories like attachment theory, which we're going to talk about today here in a little bit. The more I read about attachment theory, and I can remember being exactly where you guys are in a class like this. Of course, it was in person. I can remember first reading about it and thinking, man, I think I actually believe this. And I didn't have any words to give it, but I've always believed it. And that gave me words. So when we read about theories, it's not that one's right or wrong. They're all different, but some of them will resonate with you, right? Now, having said that, there's still theories. And so we still have to, read them and try to understand them and take an honest, critical, critiquing look at them for sure. And they won't ever answer, nature, nurture, which one's the more important, which we're going to talk about here in a second, kind of separately. Okay. The one thing that they both agree on that I really believe too, I think it's very helpful, is this teaching facilitator kind of role, where a teacher is a facilitator and a guide, not necessarily a director, basically giving opportunities for kids to learn. All right, now that's a big deal, which we're going to talk about more in here in a second, because that's not necessarily always the way parenting and raising children has been done necessarily. And again, this isn't to say, well, this is right and this is wrong. I'm just saying look, we're going to talk about these things openly and say, here's kind of what the research says. Okay. At the end of this today, we're going to end up talking about 4 different parenting styles and kind of what the research says about all of them. None of this is new in terms of the book. This is all in the book. You can read it too. If you want to go down and really research it, you can research each style and kind of look at what the research says about them. Okay. I just like this to show, hey, there's some differences in these theories, and it's important for us to think about. Now, we can blame Dr. Armstrong for this, because when I met Levi 10 or 11 years ago, we were both kind of new at Amberton, and we both were talking about different things. And he had gone to school obviously for psychology, and actually leaned towards the neuropsych models of things, the neurology, and I started leaning that way. So he kind of got me hooked into thinking more like that. And so I've spent the last few years, especially thinking more, kind of this neuropsych theory idea, which is kind of fascinating. Um, it's not like it's phenomenally new, like groundbreaking. It's just we know more about the brain now than we ever have. We can actually see scans of the brain now. Like we have functional MRI scans, for example, where we can see different parts of the brain light up for different stimuli, different even different thoughts, different emotions. Um, if you want to go and see some cool stuff, go on YouTube and specifically look for brain scans and kind of whatever kind of brain scan you want to see. I can remember taking an addictions class, and we watched brain scans of people on methamphetamine, which is super fascinating, because the same areas of the brain light up when someone's on meth as they do when we're eating sugar, which means the same. It doesn't mean they're the same, right? The products are not the same. It means our brains react the same. That's all. And we know that now. And we know, for example, that our brains are very, very elastic, and that they can change even into our 80s. And so that's that's always been very fascinating to me. And then you add on the fact that this idea of ADHD, which I'm going to focus on a bit because we talk about in childhood and adolescence. It's not the only childhood learning disorder we could talk about. We could definitely talk about other ones. But if we think about things like ADHD, even reading, writing, how we think about our thinking, when we start talking about things like how do I interact socially, how do I regulate my emotions, how do I make a goal and make a plan, and start something and then finish it? And then how do I understand it? How do I handle an impulse or an urge to do something, even if I know I shouldn't do it? Well, that's all prefrontal cortex stuff. And that is most of all of those things are part of our executive functioning. And executive functioning is exactly what's affected by ADHD. So it's not some mystery disorder that we don't know anything about anymore. We actually know quite a bit about it. And we actually know that besides medication, which is important for a lot of people use medication, and it's very important. We can also learn skills to build our executive functioning. Executive functionings themselves take decades to master, not, a year or two. All right. So that's why if you see a 15-year-old kid that continues to do the same thing over and over and over, well, yeah, it makes sense because they don't have what someone 20 years older than them has. Now, the one phenomena that's new that I have actually noticed and I've been reading about is the higher rate of adults being diagnosed with ADHD, which we will talk about our very last class. So, when we think about executive functioning or we think about our neuropsychology, our neuropsych, how does our how does our brain talk to itself, talk to our, the other parts of our body? When we start thinking about childhood, we start thinking about like the brain is in a rapid stage of development in lots of ways. If you think about it, the first few years of life, like say the first 3, we're gonna we're going to open our eyes and see things. We're going to hear things. We're going to learn to pinch first and then grab and then hold, right? We're going to sit up. We're going to roll over. We're going to crawl. We're going to pull up. We're going to start walking and then running. Then the other pieces of our brain really start kicking in where we start talking, making sounds, mimicking potentially, then saying words, and then eventually saying sentences, and then being able to hear other words and use those other words, and then put those together in some kind of a coherent form. If you think about it, our first 5 years are phenomenal, brain-wise. Like we are literally soaking up so many things. And so when we think about the fact that our brain, there's only parts of our brain that really are coming online at the beginning. Our prefrontal is not really one of those, even though it's obviously developing and growing. The parts of our brain that really come online the quickest are those, deep inside cognition, and those places in our brain, like the Broca and different parts of our left and right side, kind of deeper in, that are all the vocabulary, all the learning, all the motor development, all of those things talking to each other. And so that those things are happening. So by the time we get to 3 or 4, we do have the ability to start focusing and extending engagement with things, which is important. So this is interesting because I had a client, this isn't that long ago, that new mom, new dad, and I think their child was like, I want to say 9 months. I can't remember, 9 or 10 months. Sitting up, crawling, and would play, with stuff around wherever they could get, right? Like wherever they go, they find it. And the parents were getting really frustrated because they wanted their son to play with certain things, and they, put it in front of them. But if the son didn't want that, if he wanted something over here, that's what he would go do. And their frustration was, why won't he do what we want him to do? So this is a gateway into what parenting is. Our kids don't do what we want them to do because of the very reasons why we're discussing right now. They begin to think for themselves and on their own almost from the beginning. It doesn't mean they can't follow rules and they don't need structure. It doesn't mean that. We're just saying we develop from the beginning, not to break rules, but to have our own type of development, and we develop at our own pace, our own style, and that's just how our brains work. Now, having said that, we do need to hit different milestones by the time we're certain ages. but especially around kindergarten, first grade, having the ability to focus a little bit longer is always helpful. It actually helps kids socially. It helps them intellectually. It doesn't mean that it's like if they can't, they're in trouble. It doesn't mean that. It just means we got to be more creative with helping them do that. And so some of that is dependent upon environment as well. Some of that is dependent upon stimulus that they get or not get. And so as we get older, especially in childhood, we basically mimic or mirror most everything that we see around us, for sure, because that's how we're learning for the most part. Okay. There's one or two things. I think I kind of mentioned this, but sometimes if there's deficiencies in attention, it can make it difficult to complete tasks, especially later. Like, in other words, if you can't stay with something, it makes it harder. You do have because then you have difficulty reading, because you got to stay with reading, especially as you learn. And then you can have difficulty forming relationships and then having empathy. Empathy itself, we're going to talk about here in a second as we talk about emotions. Right now, we're just kind of looking at cognitive development. It doesn't mean that you can't teach it. It just means that sometimes it's harder, and it depends on, again, the environment. It depends on the development of the brain. It depends on any kind of stimulus that they have or don't have. And so some of it, I think, is also dependent upon the reactions, whatever the reactions the caregiver gives as well. That's very, very important too. Okay. There's one thing. Okay, we're going to talk about the self. So as we go through our time, there's two or three big umbrella themes inside of development. One is the self, how we develop a self. If you think about it, we have to have a concept of ourself. We get it somewhere, and it starts early. If you don't have a great concept of self, or at least start heading down a secure way of having that, you have trouble leading to the next thing, which is identity formation. And that's really in adolescence when you start forming identity. And as we come out of identity formation into adulthood, that's when identity formation becomes like your ability to say, here's who I am, what I think, what I believe, here's what I'm about, kind of thing. And so basically the first 20 years or 25 years of our life really is kind of taking in all of that information and deciding on the back end, like, do we like that or believe it, or is it good, or what do we think? But it all starts here with the development of ourself. And one of the first emotions that we feel is guilt. We feel other ones too, but guilt is a very powerful emotion. Is what we would call a primary emotion when we think about emotional development. Guilt is a primary emotion, which means it's kind of like at the core of our limbic system is we'll have guilt. So here's my 1 minute definition of the two forms of guilt that human beings feel. And there's different variations of these two forms for sure. The first form is guilt where we've done something wrong, like we made a mistake or we did something wrong or we said something wrong, and then we were like, oh shoot, I feel guilty about that. I messed that up. And that would then hopefully motivate us to fix whatever it was, apologize or make it right, whatever, right? That's not necessarily a bad guilt. That's actually good. There's nothing wrong with that, unless we don't do anything about it, which is pretty much true of any kind of tough emotion. The second kind of guilt is when we didn't really do anything wrong. Something happened to us, but not because of us. Like something happened or something was said or something happened around us, and then we were blamed or maybe we were shamed or something, and we didn't do it, but we still feel guilty about it. Like we still feel a guilt that does definitely lead to a very powerful shame. In other words, we not only feel like we've done something wrong, even though we didn't, then we think something's wrong with us. All right. So that guilt is not a good guilt. That's not helpful. And the reason why I'm bringing this up here is because the vast majority of our clients have issues in that area where guilt is so strong and powerful, it's turned into shame. And eventually, especially if it happens young enough in childhood, that kind of guilt then affects what we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves and what we think about other people. Right? Now, it doesn't mean it can't change, but we're talking about early formative times. So we're talking about in childhood, even up into middle school, high school, this can be happening. So if you think about it this way, when we have neural pathways in our brain, so when our synapses connect and those neurotransmitters connect, we form basically rivers of thought in our brain, right? If we want to change one of those thought patterns, it means we got to bypass basically a river, build an offshoot of that to go around it and carve out a different path, which doesn't happen overnight. It takes work and takes time. The younger we are, it's a little easier. The older we get, it's a little harder. Doesn't mean it can't happen. But if we have built-in shame and guilt into a human being, then we have a lot of issues later in life. Doesn't mean we can't function. Doesn't mean we can't have a good life. Doesn't mean we can't live fine with other people. It just means there's going to be some things that are going to be more difficult. And a lot of it comes out in how we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. Okay. But when we start feeling guilt for the first time, it's typically that kind of like, did I do something wrong or what's going on? Maybe it's a facial thing we see, right, from a caregiver. And we're like, oh, what did I do or something? That lets us know, one, we're here, we're a person, and there's other people, which is important. We need that. That view of self is very, very important because it allows us to see that there's a bigger world out there. And then we can start moving out into it, which is good. That's what we want, right? We want to be able to do that. We can take initiative, in things. And that's when, maybe we take too much initiative and we do too much. And that's when we're like, hey, that you can't go when you're 4 and you're on your little scooter, you can't go on the street. Right? That we need a structure, right? That's our structure. And I go on the street and potentially this is personal experience, but you do something you shouldn't do. And someone said, hey, don't do that or come back here or whatever, right? Well, we're like, oh man, I feel guilty. I broke that rule. I did something wrong. If you make it right, then you move forward. If you don't make it right, you don't move forward. You hold it. You keep it in. So emotional development in and of itself and cognitive development and physical development are happening at the same time, always, right? So they all work together with each other. Okay. So when we start talking about this idea of guilt, let's don't say, well, we should never feel guilty. Well, not necessarily. If we don't have guilt, we don't have ourself. We don't see other people. We don't view the world around us. What we need to say is there's a kind of guilt that's okay. It's a motivating guilt. And then there's one that's not okay. The one we typically work in is the one that's not okay. That's where you're going to work clinically. Does that make sense? Let me take a step back. And do you guys have any questions about any of this at all? I realize this is potentially maybe newish information or a new way to look at it, but talk to me if you have questions. And you'll have to unmute if you do. Or you can put stuff in the chat, by the way. Y'all can put questions in the chat if you need to. This idea of, go ahead. Yep, sorry.
I have a question about the last slide. So I remember the guilt versus initiative is Erikson, but I know that he had a specific age that he associated with that. And I guess I was wondering if you could say again what that was and how strongly you feel like the initiative versus guilt conflict is tied to that specific age.
That's a good question. Didn't he talk about it like maybe age? What were you talking about here? I was just looking at this the other day. Wasn't it like 8 or 9? I can't remember exactly. Hang on. 3 to 5. Sorry, 3 to 5. Yeah. So this 3 to 5. Yeah, this is a good question. All right, now here, when I answer questions like this, don't go and say, well, Dr. Bedard said this is it, and this is the only answer, so that's it. This is my opinion, okay? I'm giving you guys totally my opinion about, and you could talk to another professor, maybe they give you a different opinion about this. Because I'm also keeping in mind, I'm also using my bent towards attachment theory here a little bit too, not just Erikson or Piaget or Vygotsky or whoever. And so when he's talking about initiative and guilt at age 3 and 5, if you think about it, to me, it's actually makes sense that they're going to start pushing on whatever boundaries are in front of them naturally. That's what we do, which doesn't ever end, by the way, just FYI. That's what happens. It might look different, and there's obviously different consequences for different boundaries for sure. But he's saying, hey, we're going to take this initiative, but maybe we go too far. Well, think about it. A 3 to 5, 6, 7-year-old, I mean, yeah, that's what they do. Right. So my opinion about that is that, and just FYI, this is going to be my opinion about like pretty much every age. And this makes some people uncomfortable, but hey, guess what? We make mistakes because we push on boundaries or push on structure, not because we're trying to be mean or bad or anything. But we do that, and that's part of development. Growth doesn't come without mistakes, which means to make mistakes, what do we have to do? We have to push on something, right? Try something. And now keeping in mind that initiative, and especially with Erikson, when we're talking about this in terms of that age time, initiative is way different at age 5 than it is at age 25, right? I mean, we're talking about different things or different, even different environmental context even. And so I tend to think that we don't really learn unless we are making mistakes, which is not super popular right now in our world, to be quite honest with you. I can't tell how many parents I've met with, and I don't say it like that really. I might say it a little different, but we don't like that. And why don't we like it? Because as a parent, we don't want our kids to hurt. Which makes sense. But when we make mistakes, we're gonna, does that answer, Neil, that even close to what you're asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think going back to this idea of self, the self-understanding part to me is so very, very important. Like having a self-concept, that's where that comes from, which means that means we can start having confidence and we can start having self-esteem. I mean, all those things, this idea of self starts with this ability of us to know we're here, we're around, there's other people around us. They like us or they don't, or whatever's happening, we start taking in that information. And this is actually very true. There's unrealistically positive self-description. Like, when we first start thinking about ourselves, we probably don't think there's anything wrong with us unless we're told something's wrong with us. Right. So if you have caregivers or other people in someone's life saying there's something wrong with you, then yeah, you're going to start thinking that. But if that doesn't happen, if you have good care, you have secure attachment, and not perfect, but good, and everyone loves you and you're provided for, you have a pretty good view of yourself, which is a good thing. Now there's one thing I'm going to skip down here for a second because there's a couple of things I want to talk about. Sorry guys, I know there's some people on this like, why is he skipping on these slides so much? Okay. We kind of talked about this, like understanding others, which is a psychological trait. We understand ourselves, we understand others, and we develop this understanding of like joint commitments. Like I'm dependent on you, you love me, we're committed to each other. You know, like you're my caregiver, basically, right? I can trust you, you can trust me, kind of thing. We start to get that. Um, I don't. This is another controversial thing because you hear a lot of talk about kids, especially being selfish. They're just so selfish and they're so manipulative and they're so whatever fill in the blank that goes to this very egocentric um, depiction. Yes, they are focused on themselves because that's really all they know at first, but it doesn't mean that we are intentionally, even as children, intentionally trying to be manipulative. Children don't know what manipulation is unless it's been done to them. Then they know, they'll figure that out pretty quick, right? Now we're going to talk about this specific thing here in a little bit further down the road here today. But we're starting to get into this idea of like some clinical concepts that are going to come up. And I can't remember, I think this is in my class, my counseling assessment class, I think. And I've got some of you guys I know in counseling assessment. In my counseling assessment class, I know I had at least one student that really wants to work with kids. And I can't remember who it was, but I know where she was sitting in the classroom. But these concepts that we're going to start talking about now, really, if really we can see, we'll start to see clinically coming up. Okay, things like we talked about guilt here, but emotional regulation. Sometimes kids that are struggling with things, maybe socially, kids that are struggling with things emotionally themselves, or their moods up and down, or that kind of thing. We're going to start weaving in some of those discussions now. I don't tend to agree with PJ in terms of the egocentricity of kids. Like it's obviously we are only thinking of ourselves, but I can tell you a bunch of 60-year-old men and women that only think about themselves too. And that doesn't, I mean, we could go round and round about all of those things. But what I would say is that at this age, at these young ages, especially, 3 to 7, it is very much self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say something enough to a kid, that's what they're going to believe. And when we say enough to them, then that's also what they start saying about themselves, which is even more important. Which then when they're 40 years old and they come see you clinically and they start talking, you can almost get like, you can just be like, hey, like it sounds like how you talk. If you always talk to yourselves that way, you can, you can hear it. It's easy to hear. Because, and I didn't talk about this at the very beginning, the other big, huge cognitive thing that happens starting around 3 or 4 is we start having self-talk. We talk to ourselves about all kinds of stuff. Some of it's just like, imagination and creativity, but some of it's more directed towards ourselves, and some of it's more based on our environment. And that is, I do believe a lot of that is nurture. There's some nature involved. There's some genetics involved for sure, but there's a lot of nurture involved when we start talking about self-talk. And if we have negative self-talk, it does not help us later in life. It doesn't mean we can't function. It doesn't mean that we can't live and be fine with our, do whatever the things we want to do. Doesn't mean that. It just means that there's things that are going to be harder because of that. And self-talk starts early in life. So that's another thing to kind of, I didn't bring that up before. There's one thing I kind of mentioned this a little bit, self-esteem, like this view of self. You have a self-concept of, hey, I'm here and I'm feel pretty good, and I think I can. There's things I can try and do, and there's things I maybe can't do, and then we start thinking about like globally. I think self-esteem globally speaking is kind of like, as I approach something, I fairly confident or more positive than negative. If we have high self-esteem, we're more positive than negative, that we can probably figure it out or do it. If we have, lower self-esteem, we might be more negative about what we can accomplish, even if we accomplish it. And so we do know that there's a couple of things that are interesting in that kids with high self-esteem specifically don't necessarily perform better in school. I mean, a lot of that could just be they lack confidence or they just don't work. They don't work at something. That could be happening. But they also tend to have greater initiative, which makes sense because they just go into most things thinking they can probably figure it out. And that self-concept or self-esteem especially starts early in life. The thing about, excuse me, self-esteem and self-concept, those can also be changed over time. You can work on those as well. And they'll change over time and ebb and flow. We're never just one way. We're pretty much ebbing and flowing. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I want to talk about, like I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of big concepts that we will definitely talk about more clinically, and this is one of them: self-regulation. So the ability to start managing your behavior, your emotions, your thought starts early in life. So obviously when we're younger, we're not great at it because we got to practice it. And self-regulation doesn't mean not getting mad, or doesn't mean not feeling angry, or doesn't mean thinking bad things. It doesn't mean that. It means you have those things, but you're able to react and respond in a better way. Okay. For example, if you have a kid, I'm gonna say I got a 9-year-old niece, and this is very much happens with that age group, like around third grade, especially third, fourth grade, second grade. If you have a kid that they get mad about something, whatever, or they're upset, or they get down. My niece got very upset about a week ago. Her dog got a haircut, grooming. They've been waiting to groom her, and they basically shaved the dog, so the dog looked different. And my niece I think it just kind of took her off guard, and because she's really attached to the dog, and so she got really emotional about it, which is pretty normal response. You don't have to get emotional, but there's nothing wrong with it. So if you have kids that have emotional responses, especially when the adults in their world think they're negative, then what do they tell the kids to do? What's the response typically? They say, stop, right? Don't cry about that. This is nothing to cry about, or don't do that. Which we could argue whether that's true or not, doesn't matter, right? But what we've done in essence is we've not allowed the kid to learn how to self-regulate. We've tried to regulate for them. Right? Now, having said that, we're not saying that, we just need to be all emotions all the time, let them on our sleeves and never do anything about it. That's not what I'm talking about. When we start learning as kids to self-regulate, we learn it in two ways. Number one, we learn it by watching other people around us. That's the first thing, right? The second way that we learn is by messing up and trying it and doing it, right? And so we have a couple of choices we can do, or a couple of techniques we can use. And those are some of the things I want to talk about now. But before we do that, I want to do a little bit of a breakout room with everyone. And these breakout rooms today are going to be they don't have to be like super personal, but you're going to think of things in your life, that's just normal in this class. Or you're going to think of things you read, or you might have an opinion about something, and someone else in your group, guess what, might have a different opinion. It's okay. Great. I think that's good. Or you might all agree on it. Whatever it is, our first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of self-regulation. And the reason why I want to talk about it is, clinically speaking, This is an area that we will work in forever while we're working with people clinically. Self-regulation is a large, large deal right now to me, in our, not just in our world, but just like clinically speaking. Okay. And kids self-regulate a little differently than teenagers, than adults. I mean, everyone kind of does it a little differently. And yes, there's techniques and tips you can do where you can help people de-escalate and things like that. And we'll talk about some of those. But here's a couple of things I want you guys to discuss. Okay. How are you taught or modeled self-regulation growing up? And since we're talking about childhood, we're really talking about that, you know, let's just say age 5 to, 12, let's say. How were you modeled that or taught that or not taught, whatever. And then I want you to talk a little bit about like, okay, if we start thinking clinically, like how would we teach self-regulation? How would we help someone learn how to do that? Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and say self-regulation is not, well, I just shut my emotions off and my thoughts and then I'm fine. That's not what self-regulation is. So self-regulation is thinking and feeling everything, but not acting on that. That's what self-regulation is, right? So I'll just cut to the chase and say, well, the answer is not shut it all down. That's not helpful. All right. So how are you taught or modeled and how would you teach it? And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time here. And I think we almost have a even number, which is awesome. Does anybody else like when you get even numbers of things, you just feel good about it? Maybe it's just me. Okay. Now here's a caveat. I'm going to put you guys in even number groups, but if someone pops out of your group randomly, I've put them in another group because sometimes we have people that pop in last minute. So just trying to freak out about that. All right.
I have my other Zoom, so before you put in groups, I'm going to go ahead and hop off since it starts at 10, so that way I don't mess up your groups, okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I also will need to leave.
Yeah, jump out. Yeah, no problem.
Hey, well, at least that was 2, so maybe you can keep it even.
Anybody else tired of me? We're gonna get out of here. Did I run anybody else off? That's my whole job, is run everybody off.
I also need to leave. I have to do
Yep.
group 15.
Get out. Go.
Can I message you about the homework?
Yeah,
I
you
wanted
bet.
to ask you questions after class, but
Yeah.
I'll message you about the homework.
And watch the recording at the end. I bet someone asked the question you have. I guarantee you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Man, these groups are getting better and better. All right. Everybody else good?
My internet is unstable, but I'm gonna try my best to stay on.
It's all good. All right. On your mark, get set, go. Now everybody comes on screen. Ha ha. All right. All right. Did you guys have enough time, hopefully?
We ran out. We were a little short.
It was a little,
almost
yeah,
finished.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It was good what we got. It was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Really
it was really
Okay.
good.
Maybe
Okay.
we overshared. I don't know.
good. No, it was great, Audra. And
Now,
I think we gave helpful tips for each other, so.
good,
yet
Now-
we came from different sort of backgrounds, so that was good.
Yep.
good. Yeah. Okay, so let's enlighten each other. Like what was the, and you, in keeping in mind with the big group, you don't have to share anything you don't want to share. It's just general questions like, how was self-regulation, taught or modeled to you? I'm just curious.
In my family, this is Eileen speaking, we were not modeled that very well. We had very strict kind of rules and boundaries as I was growing up. And I honestly, I was telling the girls, I don't remember being able to really tell my parents if I was afraid or if I was concerned about something, or, you know, I think there were very high expectations that we present ourselves a certain way. And I learned later in life how that could be different, and then, you know, really embraced that. But for me, I had to learn how to do that.
Yeah, good. Does anybody have a different experience than that?
Kind of in our group, a theme was like, I mean, having times where you could calm yourself down. Like, I guess we kind of approached it from slightly different perspectives, but like I had this experience when I had a meltdown in my 4th grade elementary school class. And I was just like upset that I couldn't understand how something worked. And I basically they just let me go sit in the corner of a classroom, not like in a disciplinary way, but well, maybe it was, I don't know. But the way I remember it as a kid was like, okay, fine, here's some space. When you're calm again, you can re-engage with what other people are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. So we have 2 totally different techniques so far. I love guessing if someone's about to say something, because I can see
I'll
people
say
looking at
Okay,
their
I'll be the
screen.
one. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna, oh, I'm sorry, go
All at the
ahead.
same time.
Leanne,
Go ahead, Lee.
go first.
Okay, I think in my core family, journaling was a big model for me. It was more of a write your feelings down. We discussed in our group kind of dynamics of our family and how our moms kind of guided us, or, you know, or maybe our dads reacted differently to our emotions, maybe because we were younger adolescents. But I remember my mom distinctively guiding me to go write, go, you know, and to this day, I still journal my feelings. So.
Gotcha. Good.
So I was
Jody, what-
telling my group, I was not taught to regulate. In fact, the modeling was not the greatest modeling. My parents when my dad was home, he was away a lot for his job. When he wasn't home, I think he was tired and he didn't regulate his emotions well. And then, you know, it was mom and dad back and forth. And so I tended to want to just go, I would kind of leave and go off to myself, so I didn't have to hear all that. So, but I had grandparents too that were right next door. And so I think they maybe helped offset that, because I have a very healthy relationship with my husband and we don't do all that. So I think it's kind of interesting how I could have been a completely different person. And all I can think is that maybe my grandparents kind of helped offset all of that. So I don't know.
I think the culture at that time also is part of a difference. You know, I was raised in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was a children should be seen and not heard kind of time in society. And it was just, you know, self-regulation wasn't, you know, we weren't taught to sit and talk about our feelings. We were taught to, you get with the program because we have, you know, there's this to do, you know, that kind of thing. I think that definitely had an impact on, you know, development in terms of how our generation is different from my children's generation, for sure. You know, we didn't have Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil to teach us how to better raise our children, or my parents didn't. I did.
Yeah. Okay, good. I don't disagree with any of that. I think you're onto something with the cultural aspect of it, for sure. Absolutely. So one of the things that I find to be helpful about some of these discussions is, okay, talking about what we know now. We didn't know all these things, you know, maybe at one point. We definitely know that talking things out helps. Like if we were able to put things in words, that helps. We know that. That's why counseling is so important to people. And you'll have clients that'll be like, just saying something out loud to you without you doing anything. Like you just ask 3 questions and they talk. They'll say, I feel better, like, you know, this feels better. So we know that. The one thing I want us to think about, and I kind of want to, and if you're in my counseling assessment class, I apologize because you're going to hear this next week too. I want us to start thinking about, okay, this is awesome. We need to talk it out. We need to talk things out. We need to say things. We need to say how we feel. We need to be able to identify it, be self-aware of it. We also need to know what to do, because there are things we can do that will be helpful. If journaling is one of them, that's awesome, right? If it's go sit, hey, go sit by yourself for a second and take a couple of breaths, that's fine, right? But my point is, we need to do something with it. Now, when I say do something, it doesn't mean it has to be super dramatic or drastic, but we don't need to just be like, oh, that's so great, you talked to me. That's it, right? We need to be able to say, hey, let's think about these things, right? Here's the reason why. Emotions don't have memories. They just have a context that they live in, right? So you could have an emotion at 8, whatever, you name the emotion, you could have it at 8 years old. And then you could have it at 38 years old. Same emotion, totally different context. Make sense? So here's a mini session. Everybody here, and I'm gonna send everybody a bill at the end. Everybody's gonna get a little invoice. Here's a mini session on emotions that we can talk about when we talk about regulation. I want all of you to write down right now any emotion you have, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be like annoyance, it could be frustration, it could be tired, fatigue, whatever emotion you have, write it down. Any emotion. And then just hold on to it. We're going to come back and talk about it in a little bit. Because when we start talking about regulation, it's not just not feeling something, it's feeling something and doing something with it. That's what we're trying to figure out. And everyone's different when it comes to this too. You know, not everyone will respond the same, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. And this exercise was also not meant to like, well, let's start, you know, throwing all our parents under the bus because they didn't teach us or blah. That's not what guess what? Guess why they didn't do it? So if we want to really get into it, we'll start talking generations if we want to. And guess what? There's reasons why we do the things we do. That's just how it works. So this is not a time of like, hey, I'm going to start throwing everybody on the bus. That's not helpful at all. And I'll just be honest, when I first started clinically, that's what I used to do with clients, is like kind of help them throw their parents or family under the bus, which is I feel horrible about now. And I'll do any of that now because that is not helpful. That's not what this is for, right? But I'm harping on this specific thing because self-regulation is a huge deal in clinically speaking, right? And you'll get clients that have all the experiences you guys just mentioned as they grew up, all of them, no matter what time frame we're talking about. Because today in 2022, for sure, we look at social development differently than we did in 1972, for sure, absolutely. However, guess what? We still have the same behaviors in a lot of ways in a lot of different places. So because why? We don't like feeling things, especially things that are hard or uncomfortable, right? So if we don't like feeling uncomfortable, guess what we're going to do? We're going to try our best not to feel it, right? Does that make sense? Sometimes we avoid activities, not because we're avoiding the activity, we're avoiding the feeling that comes with the activity. That's a lot of the reasons why we avoid it. And if we teach that early in life, for example, my son, who is 15, has ADHD, but he's kind of on a continuum of it. He tries to use it as like an excuse. A lot of the times we're like, I don't know, you're not, that's not it. I don't care what you say. This is not ADHD right now. This is lazy. What is happening? But he has pretty good anxiety, and that's comes natural in my family. And we got some genetic stuff that happens because of that. And so what we have to do with him is two things. We have to be his prefrontal cortex, because he doesn't always have a good one. And we have to push him into doing certain things that he doesn't want to do. Because avoidance is like direct gasoline fuel to anxiety. That's what fuels it for the most part, which we'll get into a lot deeper later. And especially in some other classes, we talk about this a lot more. Self-regulation is the ability to feel something, think something, and then manage it. That's what this is about. Now, go to your little emotion word or two, whatever you wrote. What emotions do you feel now? Is it different? Is it the same? Did it change? Anybody feel something different now than they did 6 minutes ago? Or is it the same? If it's different, that's awesome. If it's not the same, it's fine too. It doesn't matter. We're going to do this. We'll do this again. I just want you to keep a look at it. Okay. All right. Any questions about this before we're going to shift gears and jump into something else? Any questions about any of this before we move forward? Okay. Awesome. Okay. Now we're gonna jump into this idea of parenting, and the reason why I do this too is, clinically speaking, whether you work with kids or adults, I just can't imagine a scenario in your practice where you won't talk about parenting at some level sometime. It's just a large part of our world, and for sure, this word families definitely means different things now than 20 years ago, for sure. Just know that when we're talking about families, in our context here, we're talking about any kind of family you can think about. Our world has changed from that standpoint, in terms of like how families are viewed and what a family looks like. But we still developmentally go through very similar things. We just might have different types of families involved. And so we know there's a few things we know too that happen just in general. As kids continue to age, you spend less and less time with caregivers as you get older. That's a normal process, unless you lived in the 70s and 80s and none of us had adults around us ever at any point in our life. I don't even know how we're alive. I'm not joking. Right now, I can say this because I know where Kara grew up too. There's no way that me and my friends, one of us, shouldn't be around, because just for the simple fact we ride in the back of a pickup truck on an oil top road going way too fast. And sometimes sitting on the tailgate, holding on to the little bar that's holding the tailgate and just holding on. Like, how are we alive, right? It's just that piece is different right now. It's the exact opposite now. We have adults around all the time now. And I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying it's just different. It's just that's how it is now, right? At the same time, it's perfectly normal and natural for kids as they get older to spend less time with adults, especially their caregivers. It doesn't mean adults are less important, FYI, obviously. It just means that's what happens. For example, my 9-year-old niece, last night we took her to the football game because her my sister-in-law had to stay home. My brother stayed with her. We took the niece. She didn't sit with us. She went down and hung out with her other friends that are they're all in cheerleading. So that's where she hung out, that's fine. Cool. That's awesome. My kids, when they got done, they're 15 to 14, they got done with band and they came home, and guess what they wanted to do? They want to go to McDonald's with their friends from band. Well, yeah, that's what, this is a natural thing that happens. So we know that that's what happens. At the same time, there's a change in role of parents as this happens, and a change in changing the roles of adults in their life as these things are happening. Right? So there's a developmental stage that's happening individually for all of us all the time. And there's a developmental stage happening in families too, all the time. So we play different roles at different points. I'm gonna look here for something. I want to talk about attachment style and theory for a second here, because this is something that will keep coming up. I don't know if y'all probably can see. I've got like this one shelf right here is like half of this is attachment theory books. So I've been reading about attachment theory for a long time because it's like really resonated with me. I don't know why, it just did. It was like, bam, here it is. I love this. Now there's some definite things that are like, but man, I really like it. And it started because some people started noticing in orphanages, especially after wars, there tends to be less adults after wars, but just as many babies. And in orphanages, if they didn't have enough adults to get to all the babies, like if they were crying, let's say, if they didn't get to them in time, the babies would stop crying. And some babies would never cry again. And they started noticing things like this. And this is where attachment theory started to be formed. Like, maybe there's something to this caregiver thing. Like maybe attaching to a caregiver actually is a good, there's something about it that obviously we know that it's good, but like now we know like neurologically what it means too. Just like I was talking about brain scans, we know that babies, when they're born and even into adulthood, when you place a baby on a father or mother skin to skin, brand new neural connections start forming in their brain, like new ones, like literally like y'all seen the movie Avatar? If y'all seen that, like on Avatar, the little tail the little part of their hair that comes out from the person figure that goes into that little horse thing that flies and it locks, and they form that, whatever they call it, that's attachment. That's literally what's happening. There's neurotransmitters that are like, whoo, I like this. That actually happens in adulthood. Like when you hold your significant other's hand, it's the same thing, or hug. It's the same thing. Now, sometimes we hold hands because we're mad, but I'm talking about in like a loving way, in a caring way, in a secure way, that same thing happens. And it starts early. And what we know about it is when we feel safe and secure emotionally, we have a lot better chance at a lot of different things happening in our life. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems. It just means we can face them a lot easier when we feel safe and secure. For example, I've seen this happen in therapy rooms. When I first started gathering hours, I took anybody. I mean, I was like, I just want to get my hours. I've worked with kids, I worked with adults, teenagers, I didn't care. And I did a lot of sessions. I ended up doing a lot of sessions with some moms and dads who had little kids, and they would sometimes bring their kids to session because they didn't have babysitting. And I'd be like, yeah, just, bring them on in. And you'd see kids come in to the office, and the first thing they would do is most of the time stand right beside mom and dad or sit in their lap or whatever. And I got to where I'd have like some toy, like some little things for them to play with, unless they brought something. Then eventually they'd get down and they'd kind of look around because they don't know me, don't know who I am. They look around and they'd find something, they'd go venture out, but they'd always look back to mom and dad. That means they are either securely attached, avoidantly attached, anxious attached. That's part of that. Eventually, if they'd go off by themselves and kind of play, they might look back, but they wouldn't look back as much because they knew that spot was safe, right? It's kind of like when we play chase or tag as a kid. If you're running from someone, you get to base. As soon as you get to base, you're safe. They can tag you a million times. They'll never change anything, right? If we fast forward that into adulthood or even in adolescence, we don't want to run from or chase the people we should feel the safest with. Kids don't want to guess what mood mom and dad's going to be in. Kids don't want to guess what may or may not happen because of something. Kids don't want to guess the roles and rules and structure and boundaries. They don't want to guess. It makes you feel anxious. And it leads to a more avoidant, anxious attachment style. It doesn't mean you can't survive. You can survive. It just means, guess what? When you grow up with that, you tend to meet other people that have what? That attachment style. 10. Now, the great thing about attachment styles is that they can change too. You can change an attachment style over time. I wanted to bring that up because this will be a large part of our discussion moving forward through all developmental stages. Attachment style started with caregiver, like really with moms at the beginning, and then morphed into caregiver, and then dads and kind of guardians and that kind of thing. And now we have a whole branch of like adult attachment too. So when I work with couples, I use emotionally focused therapy, which is basically the underlying theory is attachment theory, but with adults. So it's basically like kind of how, in my case, how adults love each other and connect with each other emotionally. And so we have that now, which is great. And that kind of helps, at least from my perspective, helps us understand. Sometimes people act the way they do and say the things they do because they don't feel safe or they don't feel secure, which sounds really weird. For example, I've had plenty of couples where, and even teenagers with families, where they push someone away that should be like an attachment person. They push on them just to see if they'll stay, right? They want to know that they're going to be there. And instead of like asking or talking about it, they like do things that pushes on them to see if they'll leave, right? And so therefore you have to be like, hey, we don't need to push. Let's do this. Let's try these things and show that we can trust and be safe and supportive. So now if we back up to if we back up into parenting and we think about attachment styles, if we have parents that have certain attachment styles and they're struggling with certain things, and their kids might struggle with certain things, it doesn't mean we can't function and be healthy. It just means there's going to be some issues there. It's going to be harder, in some ways. And the reason why I bring this up is because I would say 98% of the time when we have kids that are struggling with something, we also need to look at what mom and dad are struggling with. That's very important because sometimes we don't self-regulate because those around us don't self-regulate. And it doesn't mean we can't self-regulate, it just means it's harder sometimes. So we need to be mindful of that as well. This idea of parents as managers, and actually there's actually a really good program about emotional coaching that the Gottman Institute offers, which I think is actually really good. It's just that kind of idea where you manage, you're kind of monitoring and you're kind of managing opportunities, but you're also maintaining a structured, organized family. In other words, you're not like micromanaging everything. You're leaving enough space, but you're also providing structure. And what's important about structure early is that as they get older, as kids get older, they're cool with structure at the beginning most of the time. As they get older, they want to start asking why do I have to do this? And then by the time they're teenagers, we all know what happens. Why can't I do this? What's the problem? Right? And because I said so works when they're really little. As they get older, because I said so works less and less. You can still do it. I'm not saying you can't do it. It just doesn't work as well. Right? You have to start giving reasons. Does that make sense? and I'm not just saying this because this is what my opinion. This is like well researched. We know some of these things based on research that's happened over time. And so when we start thinking about I was talking a little bit about these parenting styles. And we're gonna end here today and pick this up next time in adolescence, because I do want to have one more breakout time with everyone. So these are the basic 4 styles that you can look, and this is on the book. You can read about them, and you can Google. The great thing about this is there's a lot of research behind this. So you have kind of, if you look at like extremes, like authoritarian and indulgent would be extremes on the, you know, and authoritarian is exactly what it sounds like. It's very hard, you know, that Kara mentioned this is, you know, kids are seen and not heard. That's fear-based, guilt-based, you know, this is get with the program. This is it. That style of parenting has been around for how long? Forever. Been around a long time. It works. I don't think it works awesome in the long run, but it works. Indulgent parenting is exactly what it sounds like. It's like almost no rules, like it's very chaotic and kind of like anything goes. And negligent parenting is just as bad because it's like I'm here, but I'm not here. You know, like sometimes parents that are present, like physically, but not mentally and emotionally, is almost as bad as if they're not present physically. It's almost the exact same thing. As a matter of fact, there's a significant amount of research coming out right now about I always forget his name. I see his face. I've got like 3 of his books. Of course, I always forget his name. It's I'll think of it later. This idea of presence, the power of presence, like just being there, just showing up, not just physically, but emotionally and cognitively, even if you don't know what you're doing or don't know what to do or don't know what to say, is so powerful. And I think it goes back to attachment, but there's a lot of power behind that. Authoritative parenting encourages kids to be independent and find autonomy while adding structure and boundaries and having consequences, right? And so typically speaking, authoritative parenting would convey the most benefit to the kids and the family for the most part. And so when we start talking about working with people, there are people that come in that will either have experienced one of these styles or are experiencing it or are learning how to do one of these. I mean, this is just kind of what, you know, and there's probably some nuances in between these two, but just for sake of our discussion, these are the 4. And we know that authoritative parenting tends to have a better long-term impact overall. And we're going to pick these up in adolescence and kind of flesh them out a little bit more too. But we know that we just know that. We know for a fact corporal punishment is actually linked to lower levels of mental health, and what's probably more insidious and we don't see is there's some internal, like a lot of moral guilt internalization that happens with it. It's usually better to try to reason. Now, reason is also subjective, right? So you reason with a 5-year-old different than you reason with an 11-year-old. You don't reason with them the same. Like I've got a client right now that I've been working with about basically emotional maturity kind of stuff. And she's been taking some things that her and I have done as a 40-year-old woman and trying to talk to her 10-year-old and have her 10-year-old do it. And I said, well, is that working? Or, probably not going to work, right? We don't talk to a 10-year-old the same as we would a 20-year-old, right? So when we talk about reasoning, we don't reason with kids in terms of like, sometimes we hear that reason with them, it means they're just getting their way and they're in charge. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is here's the structure in place, the boundary. if that was broken, here's the consequence of it. Some of it's natural sometimes. If you're having a meltdown in the middle of the store, okay, well, we're gonna leave the store. We're gonna walk out here. I'm gonna let you calm down, and after you calm down, we're gonna talk about whatever's happening. And when I say talk about, the longer the lecture, the less effective. And that's true for adults too. Like right now, I'm itching because I've been lecturing too long. To me, I'm like, this is long. I've been talking too much. Right? Even though it's good information, but like the longer we talk, it's like our attention span goes and they're like, oh my gosh, and we're talking me to the ground, right? So if you have a 5-year-old, you need to keep it to like a 20-second, 10-second deal versus a teenager, maybe a minute or two, but after a minute or two, it's, you know, they've already decided 20 seconds in if they're going to listen anyway. That's how that works. Okay. So having said that, one thing I want to talk about, and don't worry about this one. I'm gonna jump out here. I'm gonna jump back in. There we go. I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of things, because this is the roles of, like when we talk about parenting or guardians or caregiving with kids, there's a lot of roles that have shifted too over the last 30 or 40 years in terms of like, you know, let's say like a mom and dad's role, or, you know, caregiver's role, like how that works, and even like how the role that grandparents might play or may not play. Or, I mean, there's lots of roles that have shifted. And so those roles tend to have an effect on us. There are cultures where, culturally speaking, where men play a very specific role and women play a very specific role. And then there's other cultures where that's not, you know, maybe they're flip-flopped a bit, or that's not as important. Like those roles can be more flexible, right? So what I want you guys to talk about is in your group, so it'll be the same groups, is talk about two things. What would be the strengths of having very defined roles? Okay, and what, for the sake of our discussion, like very defined, like masculine roles, like a father role, and very defined mother or feminine roles. What would be the benefits of that? What would be the strengths of that? And then the second question is, what would be the benefits or strengths of having those roles not be as well defined, but maybe a little more loose? Okay. Because you'll have clients that have both. You'll see that for sure. Okay. So the first one is very defined masculine, feminine roles. The second one's kind of looser roles, not very defined. All right. And then we'll come back and talk about that. And I'm going to give you guys about, 5-10 minutes. How about 10 minutes? That'd be good. Y'all talk a lot. Y'all are some talking. Y'all some. Now, Sarah, don't jump off this. Don't jump out of this group. You hang in there. When that button pops up, just fight the urge. All right. There you go. Jody, I might put you in a different group. You did it, Sarah. Good job. Held off. Awesome. All right. Okay. Now, before we go forward, everybody look at your little emotion list there and write down if you have anything new or different or changed or the same.
Do you want us to answer, or?
I'd love for you to answer. Love it.
Oh, the first time you marked our point of emotions, I was feeling a feeling of excitement about what I'm learning, because this just speaks to me. And I don't know, it's kind of like I just eat it up. I feel like I'm learning so much. It's so valuable for life, you know, to look back, to look forward, to look present. And I really appreciate the things that I learned today. My emotion now, after I hung out with those three nice ladies, was it's nice to find camaraderie. It's nice to be able to openly talk about these things together, to learn from each other's experience and wisdom. And I feel good. I feel like this was really nice, and not only for my intellect, but for my emotional well-being. So it was a good day.
Good.
Good.
Anybody else want to share? I'm just curious. You don't have to. I'm just wondering.
I am stressed about finishing your assignment.
Talk to me about stress. What's that mean?
Yeah, no, like earlier you talked about how like stress is a symptom of avoidance. And it's like, I guess the proximate reason for that would be like, I'm avoiding the assignment right now because I'm engaged with class, right? So there's like this, the brain is wanting to engage with the thing that is causing the stress, which is the assignment, right? Or like my emotions are wanting to engage with the assignment, but my brain is like, but don't do that because you're in the Zoom class right now. So I guess there's I don't want to call it like multitasking, but it's almost like what you're internally wanting to do is being split in two different directions. And that's what's causing the stress.
So you feel confused?
No, like about the assignment or emotionally?
No, just how you feel, just your emotion.
Confused. I don't know if I'd say confused as much as like mentally divided, or like
It sounds tiring to me.
a little bit, yeah.
Fatiguing. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. I totally understand what you're saying. That totally makes sense. Yeah. We don't procrastinate because we can't do something most of the time. We
Yeah.
procrastinate because we don't want to feel something we're going to feel when we're doing it. Most of the time. Not 100%, but procrastination is mostly about emotions than it is about like our ability to do it. Like Neil, you can do the assignment. It's not a hard assignment. It's not about your ability. You can think you're smart. You can think you can write. It's not about that. There's something else going on, usually. And if we're being honest, I mean, nobody likes doing assignments. Nobody wants to do homework. I mean, that's just, that's just how it is. It's okay.
Well, and sometimes I think we procrastinate because we're afraid we're not going to do it right.
Exactly.
Afraid we're gonna
That's
do it
exactly.
wrong. We're going to say something and we're going to look stupid.
And guess what? And we can't. And that's what we're avoiding, right? The feeling of when we do something wrong, right? Whatever emotion comes with that.
Right.
Right. If we feel like we failed something, if we fail something or don't do it right, does that mean we're a failure?
No.
No. However, sometimes our cognitions might kick in and say that, which is not helpful. But Jody, you're right. And you guys, there's a wrong way to do the assignment for sure. But I'm going to tell you if you do it wrong. And then I'm going to say, go redo it. I just want you to do it first. And I know, I get it. It's hard. I wrote a dissertation and it took me 2 years to get the final draft done. And I think the first year was like, am I doing this right? Or like, should I say this? Or yeah, I mean, I get it. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Now, let's talk about roles. Did you guys actually talk about different roles, or did you find yourselves talking about what you thought was good? Because that's usually what happens, if I'm being honest. I'm just curious.
I think,
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Audra. You go ahead.
Go for
Well,
it.
we were just talking more globally, I think. We just kind of started with the first thing on, what are some of the advantages of having, strongly defined roles, and the idea that when roles are more narrowly defined, there is somewhat of an alleviation of anxiety that's caused by having so many options to choose from, and confusion of, having to choose among options. And then also, maybe some of the benefits of having more loosely defined roles. We didn't really get into so much the I think you're speaking good in terms of morality of is that what you're saying?
I'm just wanting to know what y'all think, really, more than anything, about if they're, the benefits of having very structured roles versus the benefits of having roles that are a little more unstructured or a little more
That was
like
kind of
interchangeable.
our primary. That was our primary, and then we also talked about how, that there are differences in the biology of a male brain versus a female brain, whether that brain is inside a female or a male body, and that maybe if roles are, more like defined according to how that brain functions most productively, that could be a benefit of a loosely defined role. And then Rachel had a really good, you'll have to say it for yourself, Rachel, but your thought about how roles are defined and the importance how you said it way better than I can say it.
I think my thoughts are, well, who defines the role? Like, what's the authority that you're operating under that defines the role? And is the role defined by like these tasks or whatever, or are roles defined like by our strengths and what we like love and serving each other, like by those things? I mean, those are kind of like how I think about roles, because if someone's defining your role, if society is defining your role, could be changing. But what is the best way to define a role for everybody to operate in the way that is who they're supposed to be? Like, where do you go to get the truth and the authority of that? That was just kind of my thoughts.
It's a good thought. Who's in charge of the roles? It's kind of like who's in charge of all these standards on testing? Kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got you. Good. So and again, going back to what I've said at the very beginning, one of the reasons why we're going to talk about things like this is because these things are going to come up clinically, like in different ways, in different nuanced ways, because you're going to have plenty of clients that are going to come in, and I'll give you a couple of examples where with a couple, they might come in and the husband might think, I grew up with this paradigm of roles, and therefore my marriage is going to be this paradigm. And the wife's like, well, I grew up with this paradigm over here, and it's not the same as this one. Then what? Right? Then we gotta have a discussion. Does that make sense? Not that you don't have couples that come in or families that come in that had the same paradigm and everybody's on that wavelength. That's awesome. But 9 times out of 10, in my experience, that's not what's happening. You got multiple different perspectives coming in. And to your point, Rachel, like who says? Well, guess who they're going to want to say? They're going to want you as a clinician to say, well, here's how it should be. That's what they're going to want. So then you got to ask yourself this question: is it my role and my job to tell people what to do and what to believe? If you answer yes to that, then you're in the wrong field. This is not the field for you. You need to do something that more aligns with that thought. Because our job as clinicians is to help people think through what's going on. Now we can obviously give suggestions and kind of bring things out, right? Because I've had dozens of clients where they grew up differently and thought about even different, and I say roles, I mean even things like housework, like chores differently and things like that. I mean, I've had the flip side where, the wife grows up with this idea that the husband should be in charge of all, certain XYZ thing, but the wife doesn't let them be in charge of anything. So then they're thinking, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? I don't know. but you're supposed to be in charge. Well, I don't let you in. I mean, I've seen that too, right? And flip-flop that. The husband's like, I want them to do these things, but then they don't let them do these. I've seen all of those things like multiple times, all of those. So that's why I'm bringing these things up, because these are just things that we're going to think about. But if we start thinking about things too from a developmental standpoint, I think it helps us a little bit, because developmentally speaking, for example, if you're working with someone and they have something and you hear them say something, you're like, man, have you always thought this way or felt this way? And they're liable to say something like, well, you know, I was like this, or I thought this, and then this happened when I was 12. This thing, whatever. Well, what's going on developmentally for a 12-year-old? Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can think, okay, here's some things that are happening, right? If something happens inside someone's life when they're 12 or 13 or 15 or 20, and we know some developmental things, and then we know about trauma, and then we know, you know what I'm thinking? Like, we're building layers onto our practice, in other words, so that we can help people the best. Does this make sense? Hopefully, maybe any of this? Okay. Awesome. Now, we're going to stop there. I'm going to stop there. And this is a chance. It's 11 o'clock, 11:02. If you need to go, go. If you have questions about anything, I'm going to stay on for like 15 more minutes. And because I've got a hard stop at 11:15, but I can stay till then. If anybody has any questions about anything and they want to know anything, if it's an assignment question, I'm assuming that's what people want to know. Yeah, Jody, go for it.
Yeah, that's what I have a question about. So everybody's different. I work off a MacBook. And so my simple question is, I don't think I saw anywhere what type of document you want us to turn in. So like, it's a PDF or DocX or Word document. Do you have a preference of how we turn that in?
I don't care.
Okay.
Doesn't matter to me.
I like that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I prefer it's not pages.
Right. I don't deal with pages.
Yeah. I've got a MacBook. I've been using Apple since 2001. I had a chance to buy Apple stock in 2002 when it was $30 a share before the iPod.
And you didn't do that.
And I didn't do it. Because I was like, that's a lot of money. Well, that was stupid, you know. Anyway, any other questions? That's a good question. The one clarification I did make this week is there was confusion about what I said the first class about not using APA versus what I had written down on the instructions. If you didn't use APA this time, that's fine. But from here on, we're going to do APA with the rest of the assignments, which I sent an email about, but I realized that I was confusing about that. So I do want to throw that out there as well.
So Dr. Bedard, about that. So do you want on our exercises, like the cover sheet and the abstract page?
You don't need to do the abstract.
Okay.
For sure. Because it's obviously a short essay assignment. I just think it would be good practice for you to use APA. And I realize where you're getting the information from, but it actually will help. I think it'll help doing it.
So are you talking more the citation part of it, or even the format as far as the double spacing and the font size and all that stuff?
I'm talking about the citation. I mean, most everybody does the double. I mean, double spacing is typical, but mostly the citation. My idea about it is I want you guys to get used to doing it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, this is a good way to help you get used to doing it. I think it could be helpful because you're going to use the APA with everything in this program. Any other questions?
I just do have a quick question. And I keep reading. Okay, so when you say you will choose two, so we can do a review and a connect?
You do the whole section as one. That whole section is one, and you do two whole sections.
So I need to do two whole sections. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
And the limit is 2 to 3 pages for all of that.
For all of it. That'd be awesome.
Oh, no.
Okay. Because I can be wordy. So.
Oh, I know. Listen, I know. I'm going to get some people that were like 8 pages. I know. I understand. And I'm going to put on there at the beginning, I'm going to say, can we do this in less pages? I get it. I get it. I know.
Okay,
It's
all
okay.
right. That's what was
It's
kind of
okay.
confusing me because I could do 2 to 3 just on the one. But then I said,
That's
well,
too-
wait a minute, maybe that's not
Beverly,
right.
Beverly, that's too much.
Okay,
We got back it down.
okay, all right, I will. Okay,
Beverly,
thank you.
don't write out the questions. That's one piece of advice because that I had to start cutting mine back, and that's the first I was writing the question and then
Oh,
answering
yeah.
it. Too much time, too many pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
I'll
you.
get some 10 pagers guaranteed. I know I will.
And speaking as a teacher, from an English teacher standpoint, yeah, you don't want that many people turning in that many pages.
Oh, I won't read them. I'm not going to read them.
It's hard. Yeah, that's too difficult.
I got
and this-
108 students, man. I can't read all that business.
Is this by midnight, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Okay.
Y'all, since y'all are here, y'all can have till tomorrow if you want. See, that doesn't help Neil though. Neil's gonna wait. He's gonna do it tomorrow.
I think Neil probably has plans this evening. He's a young man. He's just ready to get it done so he can move on with his day.
We're going to Houston for like a bridal shower that is not a bridal shower. It's like a bridal shower, but you're supposed to bring liquor for the couple. Like I've never. They're calling it like a stalk the bar party. And it's
Let me tell
"Hey,
you
some
something.
fun."
We got names for every freaking thing now in our whole world. What is this stock the bar? I want to have one. Bring groceries to my house party. That's what I want. That's awesome. Well, that sounds fun though. I mean,
Yeah, it's unique. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of cool. Yeah.
what are you bringing?
Oh man, so we're gonna have to stop at a liquor store on the way down, I guess. I mean, it's a good thing they're doing it on a Saturday and not a Sunday. Otherwise, they'd be
Right.
out of luck.
Right. That's funny. That's funny. Any other questions? This could be about anything. It doesn't have to be about the assignments.
Could you explain the next part that comes
The-
after turning in this assignment?
Yeah, you're just going to put a reflection on Moodle on the forum. So I think I put a question there maybe or something. Each forum
Oh.
has like a question or something. And then you're going to make comments on other people's forum posts as well.
Okay, I guess I haven't seen the questions yet, so.
Well, yeah, you click on the forum link on Moodle and there'll be like a little question there to answer. I think I put something on each exercise. So then you have a week to do that. So you'll have between now and Friday to do that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So when we reply back, that's not due today. That's a week for that.
Yeah, you got plenty of time. Yeah.
Okay, all right, because I was gonna, okay, all right.
Unless you're Neil, you'll do it, Thursday night at about 11 o'clock. Sorry, Neil, I'm picking on you. Now I'm picking on you. Sorry.
Hey, we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding.
That's right. That's right. And could someone
My
do me a
biggest thing is always, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Beverly. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, my biggest thing is always the first assignment. And if I'm doing this right, I'm older and I'm like, okay, are you doing this? Is this what they want? Is this what they're asking for? That's why I keep reading the instructions over and over just to make sure that,
I got you.
understand.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you'll be okay. And I'm going to tell you if you did something wrong and how to change it and whatever. I'm going to help you out.
And I appreciate that. It actually takes some of the pressure off that,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is it. It is my only
Yeah.
chance. So that's, thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
you're welcome. Could someone tell me when our next class is? I think it's in October, like the 15th maybe, or 22nd. I don't remember. No, it's gotta be 22nd.
It's the 22nd, Dr.
22nd.
McCarty.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. 22nd. Okay, good.
October 22nd, then November 5th.
Yeah, that's right. Gotcha. Okay. Good. Any other questions? or answers? Anybody got answers to anything? All right, here's what's happening. Now we're gonna go do something else, hopefully something fun. And then you have till midnight to turn in the first assignment. I've already got quite a few. And then I will give you, I usually don't start grading those till like the end of next week because I give people a chance to get on the forum too. But then next weekend, you should hear from me in terms of like, hey, you did great, or you didn't do this kind of thing. And so I'll give you that feedback because the next assignments will come a little quicker. And so I think that's it. I think y'all should go do something else. It's Saturday. Go do something fun.
Have a great week. Go to
You
a
too.
bridal shower. Take
Yeah.
lots of liquor.
Take
Great
some,
class, Dr. Bedard.
yeah,
Really
take
enjoyed it.
some whiskey or something, a bourbon. I don't know.
Something.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a
Great
good
class.
one. Bye-bye.